STIRM 3423 52nd Avenue West, Bradenton, Florida. Phone 813-756-6566 at his home, Saturday, February the 25th, 1989. And Helen Earley of the Oldsmobile History Center. Tape 1 of 2 tapes. Mr. Stirm, you're on.
Okay, my name is William Stirm. I go by Bill naturally, originally from East Lansing, and hired into Oldsmobile in the summer of 1953. General Motors had a program at that time hiring 2 students from each of the Big Ten universities in an accounting training program. And I was selected, being a business management major at Michigan State, and served that summer at Oldsmobile. Worked in a week or 2 in each of the various accounting departments: audit, accounts payable, project control. Earl Schoen was the comptroller at the time. He was in charge of the program. Chad Newman was director of accounting. And the 2 of those gentlemen administered that program for Oldsmobile. And I wasn't interested in accounting per se as a career, but at that age when you're in college, you're interested in a summer job. And it looked like a good program that Jim was coming up with. And it gave them a chance to look at 2 students from each of the universities. Not necessarily Oldsmobile, but I happened to end up at Oldsmobile. And I liked what I saw there, and apparently they liked me. So right upon graduation in 1954, I came back to work for them. Now, at that time, the Korean War was going on, and I'd received a commission in the Army. So I only had a few months to work before I had to go on active duty. And obviously they weren't going to send me to the field someplace for a limited few months. So I stayed right in the home office. And I think they were just trying to make work for me. I worked in accounts payable for a little while, worked at what we referred to as the jet plant over on Saginaw Street. Plant 3. They were building a chrome bumper plating plant in there at that time. And Utilite Corporation from Detroit was the prime contractor. And I spent quite a bit of time with that contractor. I'd taken a lot of engineering courses at Michigan State and had some familiarity with blueprints and designs, and not to any great extent to become an expert, but I could at least handle some of the audit functions, as it were, for Oldsmobile with this contractor. That was quite interesting. And I did that for a few months until it was time to go on active duty in the Army. And actually, 1955. Yep. And then we got out in 1957 and came right back to Oldsmobile. And I stayed in Lansing until a field opening occurred, which was early in '59, in the audit department. No, Chad was the director of general accounting at the time. The man who headed up the audit department was, name was Leonard. I can't think of his first name. Howard Leonard. And I worked with him, for him.
Is this auditing allied accounts, or what were you?
I did a lot of fill-in work for those on vacation, audited a lot of accounts payable work, expense reports of field people and others who had expense reports, kind of the basic routine type work that a beginning auditor would get probably. And when an opening came in one of the zones, happened to be Detroit. And Harry Banks was the regional manager for the central region. Fred Forster was the zone manager in Detroit. And the assistant zone manager was Bob Jarbo at the time. So I interviewed with those gentlemen, met them all, and was offered a job in Detroit, so we moved down there.
Okay, what job?
And I started as the assistant car distributor in the zone office. Tom Smith was car distributor at the time. And
what responsibility does assistant car distributor do?
Well, basically, at that time, we had several things going on. We handled the distribution of the cars to dealers. We got an allocation from Lansing weekly, and it was our job to determine which dealer got which cars and how many. We cooperated with the district managers in that, who were actually calling on dealers for their recommendations and for their projections of what the dealer planned to sell and so forth. The mechanics of distributing the cars and picking which model, which trim, which one we would actually schedule for the dealer, rests in the zone office car distribution department.
Well, what about these zone preference sheets, Bill?
That's what the dealer uses to tell the zone which cars he wants first.
I see.
And based on the number of cars he sells, dealer earns so many cars to replace those he sells and maintain an inventory.
Okay.
That program, which is very sophisticated today, was just in its infancy when I started, which was very interesting. We also were just starting to use IBM equipment at that time in the zones to handle the paperwork. Each IBM card became a car order. Prior to that, all of this stuff was done on paper. You can imagine the volumes of paper to try and file in a zone office and process to get a preference out every week.
How many dealers were in the Detroit zone?
At the time I came to the Detroit zone, we had about 140 some dealers. We were on a program at that time to reduce the number of dealers. In some areas, there were small dealers in towns not over 6 or 7 miles apart that actually sold less than 20 cars a year each. And we also had some big dealers in the city, particularly in Detroit, in the downtown area of Detroit, which even at that time was starting to deteriorate. And the customer base had moved away. And it was time to look at getting rid of those dealers, buying them out, letting them retire, whatever that might occur. So there was a lot of change going on, even in 1959 and 1960, in that 2-year period I spent in the zone office. And it was quite interesting to be involved in some of the startup of some of the new processes, particularly the IBM. I'd spent some time working with IBM equipment in the military, and so I at least knew a little bit about some of the new machinery that was being used, and it was fun to learn. And it enabled us to do a lot more, much quicker, with fewer people, because we eliminated the volumes of paper and the filing that was attendant to all of that. Of course, since then, IBM has been replaced by computers, and it's all done that way. But this was a big step, because Oldsmobile was right on the verge then of getting into the high-volume car business. We were still a long ways from 1 million cars back then in 1959 and 60, as you know. But it wasn't too far down the road that we started getting into the 600,000-700,000 car sales a year, and then after that, it was in the million, and really could never have been handled on a paper basis unless they hired an awful lot of clerks in the zone office, which would have been terribly expensive. And even then, I don't think we could get the work done on time. But it was a lot of fun for a couple of years. And
how many people were in the Detroit zone at that time, Bill?
you have about 20, I'd say about 24, 25 people in the zone. There were 6 districts, 2 in Detroit because of the volume, 1 located in Saginaw, Grand Rapids, Lansing, and Toledo. Back then, each district had a district manager and a service rep, 1 for 1. And with that arrangement, there was a lot of camaraderie, a lot of cooperation between the district manager and his service representative, because they all called on exactly the same dealers and would live generally in the same location, Saginaw, Grand Rapids, whatever it happened to be. It's the headquarters of the district. So when I got out of the zone office into my first district, happened to be Saginaw. And Pat Lowe was the service rep at that time that covered the same district. And particularly in bad weather in the winter, we used to travel together occasionally, because we went all the way up the east coast of Michigan, covered the Thumb area, covered from the center part of the state from Mount Pleasant north, cut over and picked up Charlevoix, Petoskey, and we had the Sioux, Newberry, and St. Ignace up in the Upper Peninsula. So a lot of miles. I think we had about 45 dealers that we called on.
How often did you visit the dealers?
The big dealers we visit weekly, which would be Saginaw, Bay City, Midland. Those three are the biggest ones up there. Not big when you think of dealers like Story or the ones in Detroit, but pretty good sized dealers in those towns. Smaller dealers, most of which were dualed with another car division, Chevrolet generally, or some other division. Depending on problems or the volume of the dealership, that would dictate how we'd visit. Maybe once a month, maybe some of the small dealers once every 60 days. And again, that was mostly dictated by the need. If a dealer wasn't selling sufficient number of cars or was having problems in financial aspects of his business or anything like that, obviously we concentrated more time to try and assist a dealer like that. And you put your effort where it was needed. But generally speaking, we tried to maintain a fairly consistent contact with these fellows so we knew what they were doing and what we could do to help them. And about that time, the dealers were beginning to report sales to Oldsmobile by means of a card. This system eventually got a lot more sophisticated, and the delivery card that everybody refers to today as being so critical is the result of that program. But prior to having any reporting like that, dealers used to tell us every 10 days with a written report how many cars they sold for that 10-day period, what their beginning inventory was, how many cars that they received, how many they sold, what their ending inventory was, how many used cars they'd sold, and what kind. Well, it gave us a good picture 3 times a month of what was being sold, but it didn't give Oldsmobile in the zones or in Lansing a picture daily of what was going on. And oftentimes, particularly in the bigger zones like Detroit, Chicago, New York, we'd get calls from Lansing management in the middle of a 10-day period for a sales estimate, because it was critical in Lansing management to have some ideas as to what's going on more often than every 10 days. Well, sure, we gave them an estimate, but as good as it was only an estimate, and difficult to base crucial decisions on estimates. But finally, a system was devised so that with each automobile, a dealer received a card. And when he sold it, he could fill in the information. Who bought it? What the trade-in was, if there was one. So that gave Oldsmobile all the information quickly, by mail, the next day or two. And it gave everybody a lot better information on which to base sales projections, Lansing production, what kind of cars are selling, what should we build. So it was another step forward in modernizing everything.
Was that about 1960?
That was in the early 60s that began, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Forrester still was the Detroit manager?
Yep. He retired in that area, maybe 61, in that general area. And Jim Knowles came to the zone.
And Banks was still central manager?
Banks was still there. Mm-hmm. And shortly after that, probably again in the early 60s, Bob Jarbo left zone, went to Lansing. And Fred Hawsworth came as the assistant zone manager in Detroit. And Fred was there for several years while I was out as a starting district manager. And I spent a couple of years in Saginaw, and a couple of years in Grand Rapids, a couple of years in Lansing, and then back to Detroit as a district manager in Detroit. Each time the district was larger and larger. And in those days, they liked to have district managers have small, medium, and large district experience. The more recent district managers in the last 10 years or so, 15 years even, haven't necessarily had to go that many districts. Several things have happened. Number one, districts becoming more streamlined, they're larger. The need for a lot of, why bother with a small district necessarily? Moving expenses is another consideration. You've got so many district people out there, sales and service, you can't move them all the time and give them maybe as much wide experience as you'd want. But I ended up in those districts calling on over 175 different dealers. As I say, I think the smallest volume dealership I had was in Elkton, Michigan. Dealer sold about 12 cars a year. That was it. But he would come to the announcement show every year. He'd buy all the advertising material, the point of sale material. He'd buy his special tools the service department had to repair the cars. And really, it was not profitable for that man to be in business. He just sold Oldsmobiles, had no other line. He was not dual with Chevrolet or anybody else. And had limited service facilities, limited parts inventory. And really wanted to retire, but didn't know how. And that, one of the jobs of district manager is to assist a dealer in his business transactions. District managers act as a sales consultant to the dealer, act as a salesperson from Oldsmobile to sell the dealer stuff. You got to sell him cars. He doesn't want to take them. We have to sell them to him. And so it's a varied job and a lot of fun. Probably the most fun job I ever had at Oldsmobile was district manager, because you do so much. Put in long hours because of the traveling. And a lot of paperwork is done at your headquarters on the weekends, back at your headquarters city, in your home. So it cuts into the family life a little bit. But on the other hand, it's a very flexible type job. And if a dealer wants to play golf with you some afternoon during the week, that's fine, as long as you can get your work done. So that means working at nights on the weekends to make up for that. But it is a lot of fun. Pressure notwithstanding, I thought that it was probably the most fun I had was when I was out in the districts out there. If the dealers weren't doing a very good job selling, we're the ones that caught the heat from our management in Lansing and the zone. And
Who was general sales manager then? Buxton?
no, this is before Bill.
Feely?
Feely was general sales manager at that time. He'd come over from Chevrolet. And Buxton, I forget. Buxton came, gosh, it seems to me like it was in the mid-'60s, I think, wasn't it, when Buxton came?
I was thinking.
Yeah. And because I think in the Grand Rapids district, I think when Buxton came, somewhere around mid-'60s, I think. And still had Jim Knowles as zone manager and Freddie Hawsworth as the assistant. And then Tom Smith had left the zone. He'd gone to the Midwestern zones. I don't know if it was Kansas City or one of those zones. And Bob Blow replaced him as car distributor. It was funny, in the Detroit zone, we had two city district managers, Bob Blow and Bob Druding. Then we had Jimmy Harsant, Bob Jacoby, Jerry Jobke, myself. And we all kind of followed each other. When I first went to the zone in Detroit, Bob Blow was the assistant car distributor. I replaced him. He went to Saginaw as district manager. Then he got transferred. I went to Saginaw. And then he got transferred again. I went to Grand Rapids. Then he got moved into car distributor's job. I came into the city of Detroit, followed him right into the district in Detroit. And many of us followed each other at that time. It seemed like every 2 years, everybody moved. But it was nice for all of us because it gave us all a move upwards and that kind of thing. But when I got back to the city of Detroit, the volume then was starting to get big for Oldsmobile. And the biggest dealer in the district that I had was Charlie's Olds Cadillac. It's been in Detroit for 100 years.
Was that Charlie Douglas?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yep. And I'm sure you probably knew them or heard of them. Everybody that listened to the news on the radio at night, 6 o'clock news, Charlie's presents the news. And a big advertiser, a big promoter.
How many cars would he sell in a year?
He sold over 2,500 cars in a year, which was big volume back in those days. One of our biggest dealers. But his location was such that it was in a declining area, deteriorating area. And the corporation felt that a dealer of that size should be moved location-wise, and they should split Oldsmobile and Cadillac apart. Dual dealer. unusual to be a dealer of that size, be dueled. The feeling at that time was that if a dealer is that big and can make it with an exclusive line, it's better to split them up and have them concentrate on one line. They'll do a better job for both divisions. So that was kind of a blow. The biggest dealer I had in the district, to go into him one day, of course with management with me, and say, boys, we got to talk to you about splitting this place up. That was the zone manager, Jim Knowles, and myself. We go in and talk to him on something that significant. Maybe, but it didn't in this case. One thing that I felt very fortunate about, and it was great. In fact, most of us in the Detroit zone at that time, district managers had a lot of leeway, a lot of trust put in us, I guess, and it made it nice to deal with dealers, and dealers knew that the district manager was respected by the zone, so the dealers would cooperate with the district managers in things we needed to get done and wanted to get done, and it really helps anybody to have good backing of management, as you know, and. But anyway, we went to talk to them about splitting up the dealership. And they chose to, after several months of discussion and negotiations, they chose to stay with Cadillac and take Cadillac.
Okay, now, who did they sign first, with Cadillac or Olds?
They'd signed with Olds.
I see.
And then took on Cadillac. They decided to stay with Cadillac. And we had decided at that time to, because of the growth out towards Southfield, we decided that that's where the next dealership should probably be, in Detroit. And but they chose not to take that location. They opened a Cadillac store down south of the General Motors building, and been very successful with it ever since. Years later, however, I saw Charles Dalgleish himself, before he passed on, although he retired from the business. Ran into him at an airport in Detroit one time, and many years later. And he said, boy, he said, I wish you'd have pushed me to take Oldsmobile at that time. And I said, well, I tried. But you guys wanted Cadillac. And he said, I know, just kidding. But he said, really, the Oldsmobile business, because Oldsmobile had gone up to 1 million cars by then, and the dealer out in Southfield, Jerry Glassman, took the point out there. And in his first year of operation, sold over 3,000 cars and paid off his financing on the building in less than 3 years. Yeah. And of course, Charlie, there's no secrets in the automobile business. And Charlie said, I wish you guys had really shoved us into taking that deal. And we had a lot of respect for each other. I admired him. He was a fabulous man. And we got to be quite friends and stayed friends even after they went on to just Cadillac. And you find most of the dealers you deal with are business friends or associates, and you have respect for each other. You're friendly with others. But most of the friendships are strictly business friendships, and after you move on or the dealer moves on, those friendships dissolve. But not all of them. And there are many dealers that I've dealt with over the years that I'm still friends with, and even now hear from them once in a while. Or if I'm in the area, we'll call them and have lunch or something like that. It's kind of nice, and it's nice to see some of these dealers that I signed or that I found and that have become so successful. Well, that's part of a district manager's job, is to find dealers for his district.
Well, how do you do that, Bill?
Well, many things that you might look at. For example, Jerry Glassman came looking for us. Jerry Glassman had been a used car dealer in Detroit for years and years and years. After World War II, on the Livernois Mad Mile, as they called it, where all the used cars were sold. And been very successful at that. So we thought might be a candidate for a new car dealership.
So he approached you.
One thing that I did, I used to look a lot at Chrysler Corporation dealerships. Because back in those days, Chrysler wasn't worth much. And if you could find a Chrysler dealer or a general manager in a Chrysler dealership that was successful and sold a lot of cars and made a lot of money, back when Chrysler was so far down, then a lot of those guys, if you'd offer them a General Motors franchise, they'd jump at it because the potential was so much greater. And if they could do the job with, quote, a loser, if I may use that term, but a very low volume car. But if they could be successful and sell a lot of those cars that weren't terribly popular in those days, they had to be good dealers. And that's one of the places that I look to find dealers. And I found some that are successful Oldsmobile dealers today that were in those areas that were dealing with those kind of cars. And
can you do a couple come to your mind?
yeah, probably the one that is probably the most popular around Detroit. It's the Oldsmobile dealer out in Pontiac, Michigan. Al Dietrich by name. Uncle Al is the way he advertises and so forth. And Uncle Al was a sales manager at a Dodge store in Garden City, Michigan. And when he was running that Dodge store gave Oldsmobile, a lot of Oldsmobile dealers in the area, a lot of competition. Oh, I wanted to find out who was responsible for all of this. And I found out it was him. So I finally conned him into coming to work for as a sales manager for an Oldsmobile dealership. It was not doing too well. And he turned that place around and made it very successful within about a year. So when we had an opening come up, why, he was a man we recommended for to become a dealer and done very, very well. Howard Heisner was another one who has since retired from the business. But he was a dealer in Livonia, or we put him into Livonia as an Oldsmobile dealer. And, he'd had the experience with Lincoln Mercury. And Lincoln Mercury back in the 50s was not a high volume seller. But he had been the Lincoln Mercury dealer in the town of Pontiac, Michigan. And sold a lot of cars out there, in spite of being Pontiac's hometown, when so many people bought Pontiacs just because they thought they should, businessmen and so forth. He still sold a lot of Lincolns and Mercurys to those people out there. So we knew he was a good merchandiser. He had to be doing something right. So we put him into Livonia in a new location. And he was very successful in the first year, sold over 1,600 cars in his first year with no fleet business at all, just retail. Yeah, and subsequent to that, he moved to Brighton, wanted a little smaller dealership, and operated that for several years till he decided to retire, and was successful there too.
Well, how do you decide where is the ideal location for a dealer? Is that a decision by the corporation or the division?
Both. The zone has a lot of input in that, locations where the populations are, the buying patterns are happening. Lansing, Oldsmobile in Lansing has a lot of activity involved in that. The job that Jim Harsant used to have, dealer locations, territory surveys, that type of stuff, where they'd have the wherewithal to survey populations. They could gather the information on populations and use that as some basis, as an indication of where the populations are moving to and are projected to move to, so we can kind of move with them. And the corporation itself has some input. They blueprint all areas, trying to establish each of the General Motors identities in an area, either by themselves or as a dual setup. Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, for example.
Was that the most common dual, Chevrolet Olds?
That's a very common one, yeah. If the higher priced cars like Chevrolet or like Oldsmobile and Cadillac and Buick maybe don't have enough volume in a given area, but you'd like to have a dealership located there, then the ideal thing is to dual with someone else. And many times it is with Chevrolet, because Chevrolet has so many dealerships.
When did we start dueling with other outside makes?
That started in the early 60s on a limited basis. And when it first began, the corporation was very upset about it. And we did in many cases try to discourage dealers from doing this, figuring that there's going to be spreading their efforts on two different products and not give us the effort that we'd like to have selling Oldsmobiles. So for that reason, we tried to discourage it and tried to encourage the dealer to sell enough Oldsmobiles to be profitable and establish his business that way. But Oldsmobile didn't have any small cars at that time, and there was getting to be some interest in small cars, most of which were Japanese at that time. Very few European or American small cars, unless it was something like Chevrolet or Ford, and they were already gathered up. So many of the dealers began to look at the foreign cars, the small cars, which back in those days were not the quality cars that the Japanese have been noted for in the last 15, 20 years. Back in 25 years ago, those cars were pretty small, pretty tinny, and but they're quite inexpensive. So some of our dealers began to look at some of those things as
Tape Bill, we're on.
okay. And legally, there was nothing that Oldsmobile or General Motors could do if a dealer wanted to sign an outside car line. We could control everything within General Motors, but if you wanted to sign on with Toyota or even with Chrysler, we couldn't do anything about that, except that we could tell the dealer that with the expected sales volume you will have in total with Oldsmobile and your other car line, you must provide service facilities big enough to handle that total volume. Now, you just had Oldsmobile, you only needed a certain size facility, a certain number of service stalls, for example. Now that you've, in effect, doubled your sales potential, you're going to have to house yourself adequately. And we could insist that the dealer house himself adequately, expand his dealership, build new facilities to handle the other car line, whatever it might take. And most dealers, because it was good business to do so, didn't fight that too hard. Some did. But as they began to see that the foreign car was selling, in some cases, many cases, obviously the need for service was there, so they would expand their facilities. And one of the first dealerships that I was aware of, or that I called on, that dueled with an outside line was at the Sault Ste. Marie area. We had an exclusive Oldsmobile dealer there, not big volume. The Sioux was rather a depressed economy way back, even in the early to mid 60s. And the military base up there, the Air Force base, and the tourism in the summer, but beyond that, the Sioux didn't have a lot. And it was not a very well-to-do community, I guess. It was not growing, not very vibrant. And Oldsmobile sales, as well as Buick, Chevrolet sales, everybody was pretty static. Nobody was increasing their sales over the years. So the dealerships weren't growing. So our dealer up there signed on with Chrysler and handled, I think, Plymouth and Dodge, along with Oldsmobile. Chrysler sales in those times, and Chrysler being a small seller, a dealer couldn't survive with just Chrysler up there at all. There just wasn't enough potential, enough demand. But in a dual situation, they survived. We didn't like it at the time, but probably from the practical standpoint, it worked out satisfactorily. I think most franchise holders, or most of the people that grant franchises, like General Motors that has the franchise, like to have an exclusive dealer who will concentrate on your product rather than spreading himself thin among others.
Bill, let me ask you now, say there are two divisions, dual. How do you decide which one is a business management dealer?
Normally, it would be several things. If the dealer is an Oldsmobile dealer first, generally speaking, Oldsmobile would be the business management control division. However, in the case of Chevrolet, where the sales volume is always much greater, usually if it's a Chevrolet involvement, usually Chevrolet would become the business management control division. Some exceptions to that, for example, when I was in Lansing in the mid to late 60s and had the district there for 2 years, Pete Cooper, signed on as our dealer in Eaton Rapids. The previous dealer there had been an Olds dealer only, then took on Chevrolet. So Oldsmobile retained business management control, even though Chevrolet was involved there. And after Pete Cooper signed, we still retained the Oldsmobile business management responsibility for years. Now, I've understood that in recent years now, the last 3 or 4 or 5 years or whatever, they've changed that over. But for all of that time, Oldsmobile was still a business management control division in that dealership, even though Chevrolet was in there.
But what does that mean, business management?
Well, several things. The business management control division gets a financial statement from the dealer and monitors that statement closely. It's up to the business management controlling division to ensure that that dealer stays profitable. The other division is interested in the dealer selling the product, servicing the product, and of course, hopefully making money, but doesn't quite have the responsibility to dig in and make sure that the dealer is profitable and is in shaky conditions.
See.
And that's one of the big things that field people, district managers have to do, is to analyze dealers' financial statements to make sure that they're making a satisfactory return, number one, and don't get themselves in a financial jam, number two. Today, and in more recent years, while I was out in the field, the professionalism of the dealer as far as a business management person increased tremendously. Seems like so many of the dealers, when I was out there and traveling around, many of the dealers have been successful sales managers or successful salesmen. And they could do that very well. They didn't know anything about service or running the rest of the business, the financial end of the business. They'd hire what they call an office manager, who might be nothing more than just a bookkeeper. They'd hire a service manager, who in many cases had been their best mechanic. A lot different from being a good mechanic and being a service manager. Well, over the years, dealers began to realize that just that they needed a business manager in their office to run their business for them. They needed a service manager who was a manager of people and a manager of the department, not their best mechanic or the shop foreman, who was excellent with fixing cars, but couldn't handle people, couldn't handle the mechanics, and couldn't handle the business. And back then, the district managers and the people in the zones had to spend a lot more time looking at dealers' financial statements to make sure they stayed on the straight and narrow. Because many times a dealer wouldn't know that he was almost broke. We really had that happen. And at times I've had to go into dealerships and say, look, you're done. You don't know it. A negative net worth, trouble. But that's very rare today because of the sophistication of the business and the sophistication of the people that are in the business, the dealer himself and the people he's hired. So it's been a tremendous evolution, and it's amazing that the car business had dealers that were making millions of dollars a year in some cases. Many dealers that I had when I hit Detroit metropolitan district down there, many of those dealerships made $1 million a year. And yet still, we're not what you'd call top businessmen, top financial men, nor did they have those people working for them. They just made it. Cars, of course, as Oldsmobile got to sell 1 million cars, as you know, the more cars Oldsmobile could make, the more they could sell for a while there. And with that popularity, it was pretty easy for a dealer to make a lot of money selling those cars. And now, with the complexity of the business and the competition greater, dealers, whether Oldsmobile and other car divisions would have told them so or not, dealers learned on their own that they had to hire good financial men to work for them, good service managers to handle people. As product quality became paramount and people demanded more out of the car, people demanded better service out of the dealership, we were all lacking. All dealers, I think, were lacking in upgrading their service departments to the age of consumerism, if you will. And unfortunately, that dictated some of the laws that we now have, just because we brought it on ourselves. Our dealerships didn't provide the service that they should have. Maybe we weren't attentive enough at the factory end of it to some of the service problems, some of the car problems and stuff. So a lot of it we brought on ourselves. But we all learned, but particularly the dealers learned, that it's important to have good men that can handle the business for them and pay them well. When I was out there, first started out there, many of the sales managers and service managers in dealerships particularly, didn't make as much as the mechanics. Sales managers wouldn't make as much as a good salesman, anywhere near. Now, a crackerjack salesman that can be your top salesman, there's no manager in the world who's going to make as much money as that one salesman. But that's a guy that's going to work, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, virtually, and he'll be your shining star. He can sell anything, so he'll make 100,000 a year, maybe, or something like that. Today's money, and your sales manager's not going to make that much in the dealership. But in many cases, more of the salesmen, a majority of the salesmen would make more money than the sales manager. All we had was a sales manager in the dealership that would be the guy that would okay a deal, which doesn't take a lot of intelligence, and he would order the cars every week. And that's about it. Glorified clerk. And he wasn't really managing the salesman. He wasn't training the salesman. Wasn't overseeing the salesman, make sure that they were treating the customers right. And all of those different departments in the dealerships have gotten so much more sophisticated today. And it was fun to see that happen. It really was. When I was in Detroit, in the district in Detroit, it was District 2, which was the west side of Detroit. And I had that district until I came to Lansing in 1977. And the district, I called on 11 dealers was all. But the sales volume in that district was the biggest in the country for several years. Sold more cars than 3 entire zones. Portland, Omaha, I forget what the other one was, but that one district. And that was just fascinating. Busy, terribly busy. Back in those days, on top of the regular duties we had, being in Detroit, there was always somebody from the corporation that had an extra project that they were interested in, required some of our time.
What were some of those?
Oh, we spent a lot of time fiddling around with the board of directors when they were in town.
Now, what would that entail?
Basically, just kind of taking care of them in a strange locality, taking them here, taking them there. They had some relatives. I remember one of the fellows that was on the board, Marshall Fields, had a mother in a rest home downtown Detroit. He didn't know where to go, how to get there, a bad area and stuff like that. So I spent a couple days with him and his wife. And, thoroughly enjoyed them, nice people and so forth, but it takes a lot of time. Sometimes conferences and meetings involving things as diverse as United Fund. Being in Detroit, General Motors wanted to make a big impact on the United Fund in Detroit. So instead of soliciting to the dealers, it became our job to run the campaigns in the dealerships. Only in Detroit, nowhere else in the country, but only in Detroit, because they wanted to be sure in the headquarters town that every dealership met its quota. Oh, that was just an extracurricular activity. 11 dealerships, you had to put together 11 programs for United Fund. Fiddle around with that. And
did you counter resistance or much resistance?
Oh, in some cases, but not a lot. You counter resistance with dealers in a lot of things that maybe they don't want to do. If we've got cars that we'd like to have them take, and they don't want to take them. There's resistance there.
How do you sell a dealer on taking the car they doesn't want?
Well, several ways. One thing I used to tell a dealer, Helen, I said, "You've never seen us take a car apart, put it back in the parts department, have you? And you've never done it in the dealership either. You've always sold them. Now, you may not make $1, you may not make a profit on every car, but on the package, you make a profit." One of the problems that occurred when in the infancy of the IBM equipment, sales reports coming in, dealers reporting sales in, and inventories by mechanical means now. A 2-seat station wagon was a good example. Dealers did not stock those for inventory. They stocked 3-seat station wagons for inventory. If a customer wanted to buy a 2-seat station wagon, dealer would order it, it would get built, come in, customer would take delivery. Well, 2-seat station wagons were more of a utilitarian type vehicle. Many of them were with vinyl trim, as opposed to cloth seats. They wear better if you're going to use it as a semi-truck sort of a type thing and haul stuff in it. The only vinyl trim we had back in those days was in a beige color. in car distribution in Lansing, and I'm sure Tom Smith would laugh about this and talk about it. The equipment was beginning to tell them that a fast turnover car was a two-seat station wagon. Well, sure, it was fast turnover because dealers would not inventory any. The ones that were sitting in inventory were three-seat wagons. The two-seat wagon was ordered, come in, get sold, as I mentioned. So that's high turnover cars, turnover very fast. Nobody looked to see whether any were ordered for inventory or not, or bought out of inventory. They were all bought as sold cars. Well, come the end of the model year, when it's billed out, we have to solicit orders from the dealers to cover the balance of the year. This is normally done about Memorial Day. That's about the final time you order cars. Production may last until August, but you order your final cars about Memorial Day. Well, it came out that Lansing had made commitments to buy all of this trim, mostly in beige vinyl, for two-seat station wagons. The floor panels, the seats, the interior, all committed with suppliers. So Oldsmobile's on the hook to buy this stuff and build these cars. Well, dealers didn't want to stock all of those cars. So what did we do? Well, I had one dealer that in the spring was smart enough, dealer in Dearborn, Michigan, always smart enough, Sharnock Oldsmobile, to order some cars with trailer towing equipment on them. Many dealers didn't stock cars in inventory like that. They'd wait for a customer to come in, and then they'd custom order the car. But in the spring, you got to order your cars for the summer. So this dealer would go ahead and order some for stock. Figured he'd be the only guy that would have cars available with trailer towing equipment on. So I said, why not get a bunch of these two-seat wagons, a little less expensive than the three-seat model, and a good utility type wagon for people that haul trailers. With a beige vinyl interior, vinyl seats, and we'll put trailer equipment on some of those. Dealer agreed it was a good idea, so we took a few extra that way. Couple other dealers took them. We talked to them about having a sale, have a big promotion sale. Equip them lightly, in some cases, so you've got some that are fairly inexpensive, and have a big price ad sale. Try to move a bunch, big wagon sale over the 4th of July or sometime early summer. Do things to promote the sale like that. And remember one dealer, who shall go nameless, took some wagons that way. And in fact, it cleaned up my objective for the district. So I was done. In fact, it's gone over my objective. You just break everything down. Every district has a certain objective based on your total sales volume. You've got to sell so many. You've got to sell so many. So a couple of days later, our regional manager had lunch with this particular individual, who by that time was Freddie Hosworth.
Oh, he was
Regional by the time, yep. Last thing in Detroit in the 70s. So Freddie went and had lunch with this particular dealer. Said, how about taking a bunch of wagons? Well, it was one of those long lunches. And neither guy knew what the hell he was talking about. It had a few martinis and that kind of stuff. The dealer agreed to take a bunch more. A day later, when he realized what he'd done, called me. And he said, Stirm, he said, geez, he said, I got 20 more wagons coming. He said, I got to cancel those orders that I gave you. I said, no, can't cancel mine. You got to call the regional manager and cancel his. He says, oh gosh, I can't do that. But he laughed, and he did. And there was no problem. It was just one of those funny things. That was one thing that that we had. We had an awful lot of fun. It was, as I say, a lot of pressure, a lot of hours, a lot of weekends, a lot of nights working. But it was a fun job. I think a district manager's job is as fun as it can be. And there was a lot of camaraderie and a lot of cooperation between sales and service people in the field at that time, because each district and service rep, who are now called service managers, district service managers, but we called on exactly the same dealers. So we had the interest of those dealers, and we'd get together and discuss these dealers and what we could do to get these dealers more successful. One of the unfortunate things today is that that's not true. The district service managers today have an entirely different district set up, different dealers than the sales guys call on. The boundaries of the districts are not the same. And you lose that. I used to meet the district service manager that worked with me and covered my dealers, we'd usually meet at least once a week, maybe briefly, but we'd meet and we'd discuss common problems and ways we could help each other. I could help him in service and he could help me in sales when calling on a dealer. That's been lost, which is kind of unfortunate.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And
that was a successful combination.
Yes, it was. And I think most of the field people will admit that. It's anyway, that was a fun deal. And of course, in '77, that's when the job opened up in Lansing. And
now that was manager of product delivery.
No, I was coordinator of employee sales.
Oh,
Bob Richards was the product delivery manager. Oh. My job was strictly the employee sales promotion end of it.
And you reported to Bob.
Mm-hmm. And so Ann and I are both from Lansing, and we loved the Detroit area. We'd been there. We lived in Livonia for a short time, and then in Northville, and loved the area. And had a boat and all that stuff down there, and we knew we'd have to give that up going back to Lansing. But still thought for the final job that I'd probably have, something like that, that would be a fun type job, and a little different challenge, something new. So went back and took that on. But out of the Detroit zone, it's amazing the people that have gone on to Lansing. And beyond that, in many cases. Let's see, there's Bill Lane, of course, was in the zone manager there in Detroit for a while, worked for him for a while down there. Bob Jarbo, Ed Van Driesch, Ivan Stebbins, myself, Bob Pash, Jerry Jobkey, Jarbo, of course, and Wayne Ellison, who went to Lansing as fleet sales manager, director of fleet sales. John Grettenberger, Ken McCourt, Strong. Oh, and there's some others. The general manager of Chevrolet. That's ridiculous.
I can almost say that too.
Yeah, but an awful lot of people that went through the Detroit zone moved into good jobs in home office or with other divisions. It was really a fascinating zone, I thought, to work in. I think I was lucky to work in that zone, more so than some of the smaller ones around the country, probably. It was exciting to be there. One of the funny things I remember, this was in the early 60s when Bob Berger, when we were still in the zone before we'd gone out in the field. In Detroit, we handled the company cars for the corporate executives. And one of the execs called himself, the corporation, and had an Oldsmobile that had transmission troubles. And the fellow that handled the company cars, Jack Alling by name, was what they called chief clerk, handled the company cars for the zone. He got on the phone to Detroit Transmission right away, and they sent somebody down, picked up this car, this executive, replaced the transmission. So by the time he was ready to go home at 5 o'clock, he had a car with a new transmission in it. Well, the next day he called, and we just madder than hell. He said, "We don't make anything that can't be repaired. I didn't want that transmission replaced. I wanted it fixed, and I wanted to know what was wrong with it." Now, that's unusual. Most of the top execs down there, if their car hiccups, they just want a new car. But this particular individual had come from an engineering background, and he wanted to know his transmission wasn't right in that car, and he wanted it fixed and wanted to know why. But it was exciting to get to know some of those guys. Even after hours at some of the watering holes or some of the luncheon places down around the GM building, we got to meet and know some of the top execs of the corporation, mainly because we handled their cars for them, just because we were there. So even though we were just kind of startup people, working in the zone as assistant car distributor or something like that, we got to meet a lot of these fellows. And most of whom were very gracious and were a lot of fun to meet with once in a while, have a drink with, and occasional lunch with. And so it was a great experience. But the Lansing experience I had was a fun one too, because that territory that I covered then included the whole country. Anywhere that we had a GM plant of any size at all that handled sales to employees, that's what I was supposed to do, is go out and talk to these folks and try to con them into buying Oldsmobiles. And because even though it's all General Motors Corporation, whether it's fleet sales or employee sales or whatever, Oldsmobile fights for its share and wants its share. And we had about 165 plant locations around the country that had an employee sales department. So my job was to contact these folks and help them, and with the local zones, work out programs with the dealers in the area to do a better job of selling Oldsmobiles and servicing Oldsmobiles for the employees in these plants.
You did quite a bit of traveling.
A lot of traveling, yeah. And I probably averaged half the time I was gone, probably traveling. And tried to be gone about 2/3 of the time, but unfortunately there was just so much stuff going on in Lansing that I'd get bogged down with that. But often I remember Pete Joseph, he was a couple times. Pete says, "Just go. Richard's stuff will get handled. You can't stay and handle these problems that keep coming up because they keep coming up every day. You just got to go. Because that's primarily what you're supposed to do. That's the most valuable job there is. Somebody else will handle the problems that occur in the home office because they're there all the time. And but I tried to be out at least half the time in these places. Spent a lot of time in Detroit. And
what about fleet sales, Bill? How does that operate?
Well, fleet sales operates very similarly. Our fleet people that are out in the field contact the major fleet accounts.
And those would be accounts like these rental agencies?
Hertz, Avis, National, Mary Kay. We've done a lot of business with over the years. Smaller fleet companies, smaller rental companies, district managers have responsibility of contacting those because our area fleet people just can't hit them all. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies, private rental companies, and individual outlets. There might be a national car rental outlet down here someplace at the Sarasota Bradenton Airport, but our Lansing area fleet people can't contact them. They contact the parent company. But it's important that we individually, our salespeople in the field, our district managers, and our service reps in the field, contact the local outlets. Let them know that we're there. We're anxious to service them. Do they have any problems? Any way we can help them? And ask them to buy some cars from us. And also work with our dealers to influence them to get into the fleet sales business. I went with our dealers to influence them to get into the employee sales business. Since I've been down here, and before I came down here, I put together some information. We have a couple of dealers in Tampa. One dealer who does no business in fleets in employee sales at all. The other one does it all. Now, this one dealer obviously doesn't want to handle the employee business. Talked to the zone some time ago, about the time I came down here. And I said, well, really, he doesn't think he makes any money on it. I said, well, has anybody ever talked to him and told him that he makes, on option one deal, he makes 5% of the list price of the car? That's about when Tornados were listed at about $20,000. That's $1,000 every time he delivers a car. Easy money. And, well, probably nobody did. Well, that's one of the things that I would have done when I was traveling. If there was an area where one dealer was getting the employee business, the next one wasn't, why not? Oftentimes, it turned out that the sales manager would tell the dealer, well, the employees are a pain in the neck, we don't get any money on them. Don't make any money on them. What he meant was, I don't get any commission on it. The dealership makes money. So what we try to do is to say to the dealer, whether it's an employee buying a car or not, do two things. Either if all the salesmen can sell to the employees, then you should pay the salesman a commission for handling the employee, just like a retail. Because you want the salesman to take the time to explain the car and to handle it just like a retail customer. Plus, we want him buying Oldsmobile. We don't want him to go buy Buick. So your salesman better take care of him. Or have one or two people in the dealership that have an employee that handle all the employee business and publicize it. I have a dealer in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Dale Baker over there, has two people, or did. I was still in Lansing. They were very successful. They handled a lot of employee business in Grand Rapids. They did an excellent job. and they had an employee sales department. The one guy that had been their top retail salesman, he headed it up, and had another guy working with him, so there was always somebody there, covered during lunch. And those guys handled the employee business. They visited the GM plants in the area, got to know the employee coordinators in the plants, and just did an excellent job of handling the employee business. And the other Olds dealer had to struggle to get his share. It's like anything else, whether you're buying something in a department store or a car, the people that are waiting on you are so important, and they can make or break the program. And that's the way in employee sales, just like it is in retail sales. If you go into a dealership to buy a car retail, and you get poor treatment from the people in that dealership, salesperson or whoever, you go somewhere else. Employees do the same thing. If they're not treated well in a dealership, they go somewhere else. And so many of our dealers, so many of us in the zone, so many people just took that employee business for granted. Well, it's here in Lansing, we're going to get it. Not necessarily. They can buy Buicks, they can buy Cadillacs, they can buy something else. Since Lansing has gone BOC, the Oldsmobile business Lansing has plummeted, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yes, and they're buying something else. And out in these other plants, that like Packard Electric, AC Spark Plug, they had no product loyalty to Oldsmobile. We had to go out and sell Oldsmobiles to those people, or they could buy Chevys, Buicks. They'd buy from the dealer that took care of them, gave them the best service, and took care of them sales-wise. And we had a lot of programs that we put together to help dealers, help employees do the things that they needed to do to buy cars every year or two. Basically, dispose of the used car. That's the problem. What do I do with my used car? And in areas like Lansing, like Detroit, like Grand Rapids, where there's a tremendous amount of GM employees, they want to buy cars every year. Come fall, there's a lot of one-year-old cars come on the market. Now, the dealer's got all these demos to sell. All the employees in Lansing want to sell their year-old car. You've glut the market. You really do, with late model cars. And there's not enough buyers to buy those cars, so the market depresses. So then what do we do? Well, that's why we tried in Lansing for a couple of years. We had an auction for employees. I don't know if you remember that or not, back in 5-6 years ago.
All set.
Okay. Anyway, that was the first time that we got Story, Regency, and University to cooperate. Those guys didn't like each other. For 2 years, they had the auction. And it had mild success. Generally, those things have moderate success at the start and get better as they go along. Unfortunately, the dealers wouldn't cooperate beyond that. And it was for everybody's benefit. The more used cars that they could dispose of that belonged to employees, the more employees were going to buy new cars. And they'd all three of them share the business, but they didn't see it that way. But at least we got it done once. I remember Tom Smith went with us, Richards, myself. We got them all together at a meeting, brought the general manager in of a dealership in Indiana where they've done this for years and done it very successfully to help us sell these guys on doing it and the how-to part of it. And we ended up making a deal with them. If they would do it the first year, we'd give each one of them X number of company cars just for them to buy at the dealership, for their wives to drive or for demos, whatever they wanted them for. Help them pay for the program a little bit is what we were doing. But important to get it started, get it off the ground. As I say, it only lasted for a couple of years. But in other parts of the country, in Detroit, we got some of those going. And in other parts of the country, we had things like that going. And there were such things as letting employees register their used car at the dealership about a month before their new car is going to be ready. So if a dealer got a customer on the used car lot looking for a blue current model, still a current model, used car, look through your files. Here's Helen Earley. Aha! She's got a car with 4,000 miles on it, an 88 blah blah blue. Just what you might want. Her new car's going to be here in a month. This is an employee car. Not a regular used car, it's an employee car.
Oh, yeah.
And it helps the dealer sell your car, make money for the dealer. It helps you get out of your car so you can buy your new one when it comes. A lot of programs like that. So there's techniques in selling cars, employee cars, and just like there is in retail. And successful dealers that are successful in all these areas are the ones that get the volume and make the money. And the ideas and stuff like that is what we tried to promote with these fellows. And we tried to get our zones around the country located in areas where there were GM plants to spend more time talking about employee sales. Knowing that district managers are very busy, I was, because I was one for many, many years. And every time another program comes out, something else that you got to talk about, it takes time. But if it's going to help the dealer and help Oldsmobile, that's what you got to do. And I enjoyed visiting all the different zones around the country. Having been around for a number of years, I knew most of them, and had a great time. Met a lot of the newer, younger district managers in later years that were coming along. And it's been fun to see some of those guys progress in their careers too, that I met when they were just young DMs like I was back in the early 60s.
Now, you retired when, Bill?
Retired in January, well, I left in January of 87 and officially retired in July 1st of that year. That's when I hit 55, so I took the early out. It was, I remember a few years back when we had the early retirements and I was at product delivery. 2 or 3 people that I had worked with, Betty Tooker, Jackie Harmon, and some others around the plant that I've gotten to know since I'd come back to Lansing. Took that early retirement when it came, and I'd see a lot of people who retired, whether it was early or not. They'd come into product delivery occasionally. When it was time to order a car, back when they used to do that at product delivery, before the dealers took that function over, they'd come in once a year, and I got a chance to meet many, many people who'd retired long before I did over the years. Some I knew the names, and others were strangers to me, but it was fun to meet them. And they all told me, if you get a chance to go, go. And I said, we'll never get another one of these. Never. And with the reorganization, particularly in the sales department, where they cut the number of zones, it was great for the sales department because those of us that wanted to go, and virtually everybody did, went. So most of my friends have gone, the Bob Pashas, the Jimmy Harsants, Lottie, yeah, he's still there, but so many of the guys that were that age group that I knew, zone managers and people that could come back to Lansing, pretty much all of us are gone. So there's not a lot of folks in the sales department left that I knew that much.
You worked with some nice people.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's
Yes, it is. So you worked with Gene Davis, didn't you?
yes. Mm-hmm. And
Jackie Harmon.
Jackie Harmon, yeah, worked in product delivery with us there. Yep. And Leonard Wilkinson and Lou Adado, they worked there. And Ray Smith worked there for a long time. Mm-hmm. And Richards was there, of course, for a long, long time.
Bill, what about the servicing? Do you remember any dealer that gave you any problem when you had to sell a service program or sell a sales program?
Sure. Yeah, there were a lot of dealers that didn't want necessarily to participate in all of the programs that General Motors had or that Oldsmobile had. Sales contests. Even once in a while, a dealer didn't want to sign up for a sales contest.
What would a sales contest be like?
Well, dealers given an objective, cars to sell for a period of time, and winning dealers and their wives were provided trips at the end of the contest. Sales people in the dealership usually got merchandise or cash awards. The hooker was that there's an enrollment fee for the dealer when he signs up. Now, the enrollment fees nationally fund a good share of the whole promotion. Oldsmobile doesn't just pay it out of its pocket. So many times the dealer would say, well, you're going to charge me $1,000 of prize points for my salesman. If I want to go to Hawaii, I can go for less than $1,000 back then. And he was right. Now, he couldn't go first class like Oldsmobile would take him if he won the trip. But he'd have to spend the $1,000 and wouldn't know whether he could ever go or not. You got to win. And sometimes the dealers would complain that their objective was too high or for whatever reason. So we had to sell them on signing up for the program. Point of sale material and the fall announcement material. Certain items we wanted every dealer to have, certain items of window trim, certain display things for the showroom. We wanted every dealer to have. They were important, and you had to purchase those. Let's say it was something about a new engine, something about new whatever. We wanted the dealer to have this display in his showroom, particularly if he's a larger dealer. Every dealer over a certain size is supposed to have one of these things. Important to get the message out to our customers. So this is a way that the dealer can do that. And it's like anything else. If the dealer, most of the dealers that I dealt with, I figured we had pretty good rapport, pretty good respect. And if the dealer went out of his way and purchased something that maybe he really didn't feel that was going to be that useful for him, generally speaking, when the time came, somewhere along the line, the dealer got repaid for doing that. We'd have some extra cars, allocate. The dealer was in a jam. He had a bunch of sold orders, and he couldn't get all the 98s that he had sold to customers in the fall when cars are critical. You could help a guy like that. They never told him you did, but he knew. So when the time came again, and you had something to get rid of, like we had too many convertibles in the summer, or we didn't have enough, and you had to allocate this stuff, the dealer that did the job for Oldsmobile, we tried to do the job for that dealer. Within legitimate guidelines. And don't play a favorite over another just for that reason. But it's business. This guy went to the bat and spent a tremendous amount of money on a promotion, trying something that was new ground. I remember when I was in the Detroit metropolitan area, got Bill Rowe an Oldsmobile. Because in the middle of winter in Detroit metropolitan area, Oldsmobile sales went down worse than the rest of the industry. And we had the think tank in Lansing, Pat Flanders and those people, remember? We had them plot all that stuff over a 3-year period. And we showed them to the dealers. But for some reason, our Olds dealers kind of figured they couldn't sell cars in January and February in Detroit metropolitan area. Oh, why? Maybe too many of them were rich and went to Florida. So we said, let's try and do something about this. So I got Bill Rowan, one of the big dealers, to throw a snowball sale or some kind of a winter sale. Spend a ton in advertising, promotion, and all this kind of stuff. Got a bunch of extra cars. And it was successful. Fairly successful the first year. Made his expenses. Next year rolled around, he came to me. Said, we're going to have another sale. Can you get me some cars? And he's done it ever since. It's things like that you do with dealers. And if those things work, when you come to the dealer and say, geez, we got another 10, how about order another 10 station wagons this week? Sure. They'll always sell them. Like I say, they've never taken one apart and put it back in the parts department. But all in all, it was just a lot of fun. Time went by so fast, it's just hard to believe. But I'm sure glad that we said that's enough. Because blood pressure goes back down now and all that kind of stuff. And so many years of pressure and long hours and stuff like that, that's enough.
Yeah, it's
33 years of it was enough.
33 years.
Yeah. So it's time to go and time to, although I get so darn busy now, I haven't been fishing in a month. And I love to fish. There's too much going on.
Bill, who would you say was one of your favorite people to work with in the upper echelon?
I'd say probably Fred Hosworth. I worked for him both when he was assistant zone manager and then when he was regional manager. Fabulous individual to work for, I thought, just an outstanding man. Let's see. Grettenberger, another one. Worked for John in Detroit. He was assistant zone manager. And young at the time, moving along on the fast track, as you know. And when he came into Detroit, one of our district managers, I had District 2, the west side, and the other district on the east side, District 1. It was a little smaller, but it was an awful big District 2. Whoever was there left for some reason, and they didn't get a replacement for a long time. So here was John, new to the zone, trying to handle the whole zone as far as sales are concerned. And I was sort of trying to handle both sides of the city, Detroit, District 1 and 2. And we had the auto show, all coming at the same time. back in those days in the big cities, the local district managers and local zone people got involved in the auto show activities a lot more than they do today. In recent years, it's more all handled out of home office, yeah, and very little involvement. Back then, we even had to issue purchase orders for a lot of the stuff. We had to get a lot of the junk. Now it's all done out of Lansing. And I remember poor John, you know, I don't think hardly separated for months, running around the dealerships and this auto show stuff. And we got to know each other very, very well. And I was impressed with John at the time. He was new, but he took the opinions and advice of his people. He'd make the decision because he was the boss. But he didn't have all the facts and knowledge, but he took them, which is what a good administrator should do. Depend on the people that know what the hell's going on. Get all the facts and figures together, and suggestions, recommendations, so forth. And he'd make the track to run on. And even though he was new and young, it ran very smoothly because he operated that way. He was good with people, and he used his people very well. I enjoyed working with him. A man like that you can work with. You just you don't need any motivation to work for a guy like that because you know his objectives are the same as yours are. Get the job done. Let's go at it and do it. That's Freddie Hosley. It's the same way. Let's see.
Forrester and Banks weren't there too long.
No, they weren't there too long, and both of those fellows were approaching the retirement. Now, Banks stayed quite a bit longer but he also was approaching retirement age, and the same with Forrester. And of course, Jarbo wasn't there that long, and he went to Lansing. Nice to work with those fellas, but when I was working in the car distribution department in the zone, it was more of the technical work, working with Tom Smith on the distribution of the cars. And those fellas were more involved with the dealer activities and the district managers, as opposed to the people that are in the office. And
Tom Smith, good fellow to work with.
Yeah, we had a good time with Tom. I remember Banks, when he was regional manager, once in a while, he'd get out on a limb and promise a dealer the cars. And he'd come into the car distribution department when we were getting preference set for the week. He'd sit down across from Tom. Harry Banks did not like smoking, period. I smoked an occasional cigar, still do, but never in the office then and stuff like that, or much. Maybe we would one or something like that after lunch, but it was funny. He'd come down and talk and say, I'd like to give this dealer some extra cars. Tom would smoke his pipe right in front of him, puff on the pipe, lean back in his chair. And he always called him Mr. Banks. We always called him Mr. Banks. He's the only guy we ever called by Mr. for some reason. Everybody did. Even Forrester called him Mr. Banks. Yeah, funny. Anyway, Tom was back and puffing that old pipe, and he'd say, well, Mr. Banks, tell me what dealer I'm going to take them from. He'd say, well, see if you can take care of this guy this week. We never did. But, yeah, but the type of work was a lot of fun. It was a ball. And I hope the day that the district managers are having that kind of fun. I don't think that they are.
Things are quite a bit different.
Quite a bit different. And put very well, John Williamson Company, for years had provided a lot of sales training and motivational work for the Oldsmobile sales people, as well as other GM divisions. And I remember recently at one of their meetings in Chicago, I was over there on business, and my job is employee sales coordinator. But I went to the particular place, the training center, where they were having a meeting, and Tom Merrill was the spokesman for the Williamson Company. And Tom and I were talking. He recognized me after had not seen me for about 5 years. He was a very sharp individual. And he said, the people we've got out there today, these district managers, he says, they're taught in college. Yes, further the aims of your business, your corporation that you're in. But look out for yourself, number one. And if you don't get promoted within your corporation within 2 to 3 years, you start looking around. And the fellow, I can't think of his name, that's at Oldsmobile, that was had a lot of the training programs too. Oldsmobile's education and training department. Sandy-haired kind of mustache.
Oh, I know who you mean, but I can't think. Tall fellow, slender.
Yeah, and he'd been involved with the academia universities for a number of years too. And he said that same thing once in a conference I went to, in a manager's conference at Oldsmobile for supervisors. And he said the people you got working for you today are different than you guys were when you were out there. And they're being taught different. So that I think is a shame.
It seems like it's the better way because their sales aren't going up.
Yeah, yeah. And everybody is looking out for their future, obviously. But the biggest celebration I think we had in Detroit was when, at the end of the year, Detroit zoned out South Chicago zone. We thought that was great. And we had a big party because of that. And everybody did their bit. And if one district was down a little bit, we'd all be on him. Sales guys and service guys, we'd all be on him. Or if one big dealer was down, everybody would say, well, come on, let's get this big dealer going or whatever. Whoever calls on this dealer, get him going. And there was a lot of spirit to that. And I know I had 2 dealers in Detroit, Bill Rowan and Herb Charnock. They were close personal friends, voted together. But when I'd go to one dealer, I'd always tell him that the other dealer was selling more cars this month than he was. And vice versa, I went to the other place, which wasn't true. But I'd always say it, just to get them going, to try to get them to sell a few more cars.
That probably worked.
Probably did. Several years later, they found out I was doing it. But they'd be close personal friends, but they would not discuss business with each other. Most dealers won't. So I could do that. I'd just say to Herb Charnock that Bill Rowan selling more cars than you are this month. You better get going, and he's going to beat you. I'd go down the road to Rowan's and say the same thing. And they did pitch in because they had a pride in volume. Most dealers do. They want to make money, number one, but they have a pride in volume too. It's great to say. I remember when Drumming Oldsmobile, Jack Drumming, sold 1,000 cars for the first time. He got a big trophy for his dealership. Paid for himself. We never thought of it at the zone. We should have got a trophy, but it was so important. He took it down to the recess club and showed it to all his friends. Here he is, a very Drumming, out of the Fisher, very wealthy people. Didn't make any difference. In fact, he finally sold 1,000 cars in that dealership. It's the big thing.
Pride.
Mm-hmm. Pride in numbers. Story. Good example there. Back in the Story's heyday when he was big volume, biggest thing in the world to him when he was the biggest Olds dealer in the world. Biggest thing, fantastic. And after he lost that, he kept advertising that he was the biggest dealer in the world for years and years and years, and he was way down the ladder. Pride in numbers is important to dealers.
I can see you really enjoyed your
Oh yeah, I did.
your work.
God, I've talked forever, haven't I?
No,
To waste all your tapes.
No, see, this is what we wanted to capture because, as you know, things are so different now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the purpose of the oral history interview, is to share with researchers and writers in the future what it was like at one time.
Mm-hmm. And it's great that you're getting some of these fellows who were there before World War II
Yes.
to get some of that information when Olds was quite small.